What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to break down what's going on with Tesla, SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what's happening to the overall economy thus far, what's going on with the data coming out for tomorrow, what's happening with some big earnings, what you should be watching for as time progresses. But before I break into all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am personally not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo and deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed up to 15 free stocks, and the offer ends very, very soon in just a couple of weeks. Anyways, when it comes to the market so far, let's talk about how things are looking. SPY had this high at 514 way up here as they triggered some stops before this thing ended up turning back around. Then it tried to get a nice bounce, especially thanks to Jerome Powell's little testimony today. But now SPY is failing to break this 512 area. So the question is, can we make a comeback and start to break this and start pushing higher? Or is SPY about to turn here and respect the downtrend? I'm going to give you guys my answers very, very soon in the next couple of minutes. But let's first talk about some data. Let's talk about the things coming out for tomorrow and when Jerome Powell is going to be speaking again tomorrow. So first and foremost, 1 hour before the market opens at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the balance of trade coming out. We want this to be around $63 billion in the negative area because that's going to be between the exports and imports, the difference between them. We're going to be looking out for that, and also initial jobless claims. Some jobs numbers come out in the morning. That's going to be very important at 8:30 a.m., an hour before the market opens. For initial jobless claims, we want this to be between 215 and 217,000. If it's a little bit too hot, so this could be a little negative for the markets because this kind of goes in the opposite of what Jerome Powell was kind of saying. But it's not like that significant compared to like jolts or something else like that. Now, going forward, at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tomorrow again, right 30 minutes after the market opens, Jerome Powell is giving another speech. He's going to be answering a lot of questions in front of the Senate's committee this time. So today when the guy spoke, when he was answering questions today, it was at the same time, but instead he was talking in front of the House. For tomorrow, which is Thursday, he's going to be speaking in front of the Senate at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. So when he spoke today, he basically reinforced the position that the Fed is not ready to cut rates quite yet. He also mentioned that the Fed has a lot of work to do because they have to continue to monitor the data and they can't say things with high certainty quite yet. He was asked about a recession. Is the US likely going to enter one? And he actually implied that the answer is no as of right now. As of right now, the Fed is kind of like considering that the projections show more growth in the economy to continue, and the US is still doing quite well in his opinion. However, there is a risk of a recession in the future. Of course, there's always that possibility, and Powell does not want to rule that out. He also mentioned that for the soft landing, as of right now, they're on track for it, but nothing can be said with 100% certainty. As of right now, the data may suggest it, but he's not 100% certain because they have to continue to monitor the situation. That's kind of like the way Jerome Powell put it. He also said that there's a lot of things he can't really comment on since it's not really his job. And there were a lot of people trying to play the game of politics, but Jerome Powell did what he could best to kind of avoid that. So with that being said, with him trying to avoid all the politics nonsense and all that other stuff that was going on. He's going to do the same thing tomorrow. I just want to note that typically when Jerome Powell speaks 2 days in a row, the first day is when we get the most volatility. The second day tends to be a little bit more quiet, and we don't tend to see the market move as aggressively or react as much to him. So we'll be watching for that when he does end up speaking in front of the Senate tomorrow. So once again, it's going to be tomorrow. You could actually watch it. Excuse me. You could watch it all on YouTube. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m., he's going to be speaking in front of the Senate's committee. He's going to be speaking about banking, housing, and urban affairs. For earnings that just came out, we had two big ones, not necessarily big ones, but two of the biggest ones so far today, Victoria's Secret and also Inovio. So for Victoria's Secrets, they actually ended up doing okay for earnings. They had about $2.58 per diluted share. That's their earnings per share. The estimate was $2.45. So they kind of beat on that. However, revenue was just barely met, but unfortunately, things are not as great for them in terms of their overall forecasts, and that's why the share price is kind of like crashing right now. So right now we're seeing lots of signals of weaker sales forecasts and weaker demand for apparels. Their overall forecast for sales was about $6 billion for the year ahead, below Wall Street's estimates of $6.19 billion. Not the best of news for them. That's why the share price is down. For Novio Pharmaceuticals, unfortunately, Despite their earnings being kind of like okay, coming in line with expectations at $25 million or $1.10 per share, the issue is compared to what we saw last year during the fourth quarter, right? And I'm thinking they're actually referring to 2022 in this case. So 2022 in the fourth quarter, this is like 2023 in the fourth quarter that just came out. But for that previous period, they actually did 54 million with $2.61 per share. So there's a big decline in their earnings because things are a lot different now compared to the previous scenario at the time. The world is in a very different state in terms of like any pandemics or anything like that. So things are very, very different. And that's the reason why we're seeing this decline in their earnings. The share price is down just a little bit. Their overall guidance was not too bad, not too great, just so so. So this is kind of flat right now. But the question is, how is this going to affect the markets? Victoria's Secret and others are not enough to really shake the whole markets, but Jerome Powell is. So we'll see what Jerome Powell causes. But there are some things I want to show you guys on SPY which are very important. So starting off with SPY, the 4 hour is starting to turn just a little bit as we're barely holding our 20 EMA, and we're still kind of bearish looking overall. Now, this isn't 100% confirmed yet because we have to wait and see what Powell says. But when you look at the 5 minutes time frame and kind of zoom out a little bit, you will notice that there's a possible head and shoulders like structure that is developing right here on the chart, right? So we have this left shoulder, we have a head, and we have a right shoulder developing. This does suggest some downside could be coming, especially as we have an unfilled gap down to 507 and another gap all the way down to lower levels. So that's one possibility. But before we talk about some downside, let me break down something else that's important. So SPY has a possible downtrend that could be being established right now. We had 514 as the top, we had a lower high at 512, and we could just continue to downtrend from here. However, always keep this in mind. Just for hypothetical reasons, let me just show you something. If you want to turn back to bullish, okay, and by the way, I'm going to go through the bullish case, the bearish case, and then my opinion, my prediction a little bit later. But first, if we're bullish, if Jerome Powell says something, the market turns bullish off data, we have to try to break above 512 to 512.5. If we break that resistance, if we break the high from today, SPY has potential to retest this high right here and start pushing up to this 514 area. I want to make that as clear as possible. That is how we're going to turn bullish. So far, the chart does not look like it's going to do that, but that's a real possibility. If you want to be bearish, we have to see SPY do this. Whether we get a little pop or not off Powell depends, but then we eventually need to lose 508.5. If we lose this support right here, this suggests that a downtrend is coming, and SPY is going to see a big drop all the way back down, in my opinion, to 505, and eventually all the way down to the lower levels if we start losing these supports. So lose 508.5, we're bearish, break 512, we're bullish. What do I think is going to happen? Honestly, guys, the technicals do suggest that they favor the downside a little bit more, especially with this head and shoulders, especially because of how the 4 hour is looking. However, Jerome Powell is an exception to technicals. He could cause some pops here and there. So I do want to warn you, it is always possible that the market comes down a little bit when he starts speaking. He says some things, the market pops here and there, trades sideways for a little bit. But ultimately, as time progresses, as long as we don't break 512, I think the odds do favor us coming back down to fill this gap. So I do see some downside down to 507 coming. So look for a little pop, a possible pop when the guy is speaking, Jerome Powell, at 10 a.m. tomorrow. But then ultimately, I do see a risk of us coming back down to 507, even lower levels, as there's a possible downtrend that's starting to be established. So look for some downside, guys. Be very, very careful on the markets. It could even take a couple of days for the real downside to really take place. So give it the time it needs. We may hold up tomorrow for a bit, pop a little bit off Powell's little speech, his little testimony, and then we could end up falling later on. So I do want you guys to be very careful. This trend is starting to turn a bit. How about for the QQQ? Well, the QQQ has a very similar pattern. This is resembling kind of like a slanted head and shoulders like structure. We're showing some weakness here, and we have this gap down here. I also want to note that there's an unfilled gap all the way down to about like the 436 area. On top of that, to look at the trend, we had this high right here. To turn bullish on SPY, we have to break past 442 and start pushing to fill this gap at 444. To be bearish, you want to see it lose 438 and start sinking to 436. If we lose that, a bigger drop is coming. We have this high right here at the 446s, then we have this next high at 442. This is starting a downtrend, so this high got a rejection. Lower high was established, and a bigger drop could be coming. So watch for that very, very carefully on the QQQ. There is a risk of this coming down even lower. Now, one could also argue we have a very strange looking head and shoulders. I wouldn't really count on this, but you could argue this is kind of like a long left shoulder. This is like a head and the short term right shoulder is forming. So it kind of like comes down a little bit, slowly makes its way down. That's another possibility on the QQQ. I'm not really counting on that. It doesn't look as clean to me. So I'm just going to focus on like the more short term technicals, which do suggest there could be some downside coming. So I think it might pop a little bit, could pop here and there with Powell's speech, but there is a risk of us coming down to at least 436 tomorrow. So just be very careful, guys. Technicals do show that. Another reason why I'm saying this is because of Nvda. Nvda, okay, check this out. This thing was trying to push today. It hit this 900 area, kind of rejected off of this, trying to come back. So we'll see if Nvidia could try to get back to 900. If we could hold above 900, we could remain bullish and push up to 908 and high levels like that. But if we fail to do so, if 900 is a very, very tough resistance and we end up failing to break that, there's going to be a risk of this rejecting off 900 and making its way back down towards lower levels, such as 872, 875, and like that. So it might pop a little bit, then make its way back down, or it could start sinking from here. So watch that very carefully. We also happen to have this gap at 862. So watch and be very, very mindful of this. In my opinion, Nvidia is not looking the strongest. We are forming a lot of wicks right here, and 900 is looking like a tough resistance. But let's wait for confirmation if we get a rejection. Once we get that, there's going to likely be some downside. So I do want to warn you of that risk on Nvidia. Another stock that's kind of weak is Aapl, and I'll talk about Tesla in just a minute after Aapl. But for Aapl, if you look at this, we have a bearish wedge that's forming, and this thing failed to get a bounce. It tried to bounce thanks to Powell, and it failed. You guys can see right here. It tried to get back to about 172, and it got a rejection instead. And now it's barely holding 168. We're forming a bearish wedge. So if we fail to break 170, we're going to likely continue to sink to 168, if not 167.5. If that fails us, I think we're going to be making our way down to about 166. A big drop is going to be coming on Aapl. So I think the chart still looks bearish. It's not really getting the bounce we want. Could pop a little bit here and there thanks to Powell, but there is a risk of it coming lower to at least 168 flat by tomorrow, if not lower levels like 167.5. How about Tesla? How is Tesla looking in my opinion? Not that great. So the problem with Tesla is it's bad news after bad news after bad news. Every single day, Tesla's getting hit with bad news, right? We first had the Chinese sales, which were lower than expected for February. That caused Tesla to get a big drop. The momentum continued going into yesterday. We got some bad news about the fire near the Giga Berlin, causing a shutdown, which lost Tesla hundreds of millions of euros, if not billions. And then on top of that, today we got some price cuts from big analysts. So it's just getting hurt again and again and again by bad news. It tried to balance with the market, got a rejection off 180 and came down lower. So watch resistance at 177.6 to 178, 180 and 182.5. Watch support around 175. If we lose that, there's 173.75 coming, followed by 172 and 170. In my opinion, I think that Tesla's looking kind of bearish right now. It's continuing to make lower highs and lower lows. And I think that it might pop a little bit to retest 177 and slowly make its way down to these lower levels. With Powell's speech, it might pop here and there, retest 178 or so, but eventually I see it coming back down to 173.75 and eventually getting closer to 170. If SPY and the QQQ starts selling off aggressively, this could be bad for Tesla. So there is a risk of more downside, unfortunately. All right, so I want to give you guys these warnings. I'm not saying the market's going to crash immediately. I'm just saying that there could be a slight downtrend starting, which we're long due for. I do want to wait for more confirmation to be safe, but there are some risks of this. Now, if SPY fails to break 512, remember that if we fail to get that break, we're going to continue to sink. So be very careful and be mindful of this. Let's talk about a few more tickers real quick. I wanted to talk about Rivian. Rivian's in a very, very interesting place right now. It's still holding up quite decently, but I just want to warn you all that despite it holding up, we haven't been able to break this 20 EMA quite yet. So we still have a tight resistance. To be really bullish, you want to see it break 11.05 and then start pushing for the higher levels, such as 1120. It is forming kind of like a wedge, so it's getting very, very tight. And we'll see which way this breaks. It's still bullish looking on the 4 hour. It could push a little higher, it's like 11.1. But watch and see if we get a rejection off one of these levels, especially as we approach 11.2. This is still a little bullish, but just be careful. For SoFi, we're trying to bounce just a little bit because we came all the way down to 7. I did call this happening yesterday. It is possible that this pushes a little bit again to 7.61. But be careful because with the market possibly slowing down a bit, it might pop a little bit, then continue back down lower and slowly fall back down to 7.25. For ARM is kind of curling right here, showing some life. We want to try to break 137. If we break that, then 140 is coming. Watch support at 135. It is possible this pushes a little bit higher. I could see this actually retest this resistance up here close to like 140, but then it might reject off 140 and come back down. So I do see it kind of staying in a range. So look for a little pop and drop on ARM tomorrow. For super micro, I'm actually a little concerned about this because we're starting to turn a little bit off this resistance. We have a nice bearish divergence, but I don't solely trade based off those, and I'd recommend not to really solely trade based off those. But the thing is, we had this resistance at 1150. We went a little bit higher, but now we're not really showing the strength necessary. So it looks to me like it's going to come down to test 1050 very soon. Might pop it first and come down, but I do anticipate 1050 is coming for a little drop, and we'll see if it bounces or not. So get ready for a small drop on Super Micro. For Palantir to me, it got a nice little push, but I'd still be very careful with it because you have to remember that we got a very, very big push in a very short period of time, and there's no guarantee it's going to hold these levels. If we get a rejection and we end up losing our support, so I'm going to be watching to see how well it holds above 25.86. If we lose that, 25 flat is coming. If we do hold this, we could bounce, but I do anticipate it's going to come down just a little bit towards 24.92. For the IWM Russell 2000, uh, I I want to note that it kind of popped a little bit, but now it's coming back down. If we lose 204.79, a bigger drop is coming to fill this gap all the way down towards 203. I think that that's going to likely happen as this trend is starting to resemble that of SPY. There's a possible head and shoulders like structure. We had this high up here, we made a lower high. I think that's what's going to happen tomorrow. Is it may pop here and there thanks to Powell, but ultimately I see 203 coming. The chart is starting to turn a bit. For Microsoft, this thing was trying to bounce, but it's not looking that great to me. So we're going to be watching 400.96. It's kind of shuffling around here because that's where our key support is. If we lose 400.96 to 400, a bigger drop is coming to not just 398, but I think 395 or below that. So be very careful with Microsoft. It's looking a little bit weak. We got some bad news that came out, so just be very, very careful. So watch this. If we lose 400, I'm going to be watching 397 and 395. If we end up losing that, a bigger drop could be coming to like 392. I think the chart's looking kind of bearish now. Look for a little pop at first, but then we could start dropping even more overall. So just be careful on Microsoft. For AMD, AMD has a doji on the daily. We have a gap to fill below around this 205 area. On the 4-hour time frame, we got a nice little push, but now it's trying to turn just a little bit. If we lose 210, watch it come down to 204. I think that it might pop a little bit here and there, but then make its way down towards 203.39. There's a risk with testing the 20 EMA, so I do think it might come down just a bit. And this could be heavily impacted by Nvidia and also by the market, so just be very careful. For a couple more, we're going to talk about the HYG. This is very important because this is very flat right now. I see a retest of the 20 EMA. It's going to come down just a little bit, but overall, it's just kind of trading sideways, not really doing much. SPX, in my opinion, has a very similar setup as that of SPY. In fact, it's dictating SPY. But you can see on the 4-hour, there's this gap below to fill. We came up to fill this first gap. We came down a little bit, might pop a little bit, but eventually I see it coming down towards uh, 550.82. Basically, I do see it coming down to fill that gap. So this could actually drag SPY down. The VIX, the VIX is interesting because this thing is starting a slight uptrend. Notice how the VIX bounced here. Is it going to come down to form like a right shoulder and then start pushing off an inverse head and shoulders? I don't know, but we also have an unfilled gap around 15.34, and we're starting a slight uptrend. So if this starts pushing higher, this is going to be bearish for the stock market. For the dollar index, this is still bearish as the market's pushing, but we're going to be watching to see if we can actually hold this support. Well, we're going to be watching 103 flat, not to mention uh, the support right over here. If we do get a bounce, 103.75 is a possibility. I do believe that this thing may bounce soon. And I think that this will go back to normal soon and try to make its way back up, but it's going to need some time to do so. For Coinbase, it's still bullish on the daily time frame. It's still very, very strong thanks to lots of bullish news. But like I said before, it may even outperform the market as we're forming a nice wedge right here. If it breaks 240, we could be pushing for 244 and eventually make our way up to 250. It's still bullish. This is stronger than SPY in the market. It's still on a very, very nice uptrend. We have to break 240 though, very tight resistance up there. If it breaks, it could push higher. If we reject off 240, we'll come down to 223, but this looks bullish. The odds 2 favorites is pushing a little bit higher. It's heavily outperforming the market. For Google's looking kind of weak to me, not showing the strength it was showing before. Could pop towards 133, then make its way down to 131 and then 130. So just be a little bit careful. However, it is trying to base around 130, so it might pop and drop a little bit, but then it may trade sideways around 130, so look for some downside. Amazon to me is looking a little bit weaker. I do see 171 coming. Could pop again to 174, but then make its way down to 171. I do anticipate it's going to come back down. So watch for that very, very carefully. For Meta, although it's green, I want to note that Meta, we got this rejection of, let me see, 502. We established a lower high relative to this high right here. And that's the first time Meta has done this in a long time, unless it doesn't turn here. So it really depends on if it turns or not. But I think there is a risk of Meta coming down a little bit. So I think we could see some pops here and there, retest like 500, but then make our way down to 494. I believe it's going to retest 494. If we lose this, a bigger drop is coming to this imbalance, which is very close to about 490. I do think Meta has a risk of coming down, so look for a little pop and drop. But watch 494. If we lose that, we are going to turn. With that being said, guys, SPY, it may not turn immediately. Okay, Jerome Powell is giving another testimony in front of the Senate's committee. We could see some pops here and there. I'm not 100% sure what he's going to say, but I can tell you that there's a very good chance he's going to say some very, very similar things, such as the Fed has work to do. Economic data is looking good. So if he does say positive things about the economy, look for some pops when he speaks. But then later on, there is a risk of the market still selling off later. So just be very, very careful. There is a chance the market could finally turn. Anyways, that is it for the video. I hope you guys had a very, very great time watching this. I hope this was very insightful. Take care, guys. Enjoy your evening. Do what you have to do, and I'll see you guys very soon on the next one. Thank you for listening. Have a great day, and peace out.